The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thornton Industries conference room on the 42nd floor. William Thornton sat at the head of the mahogany table, his leather chair turned slightly toward the window. The quarterly financial reports lay untouched before him while his CFO droned on about profit margins and market projections. "Mr. Thornton." The CFO's voice cut through his thoughts. "Your input on the Asian market expansion." William turned back to face the room of expectant executives. The meeting room felt suffocating despite its spacious design. "Continue with the expansion as planned. Send me the detailed reports by end of day." His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed, but his mind wandered back to the window, to the gray New York skyline beyond. The meeting dispersed, leaving William alone with his thoughts. His corner office, decorated with awards and achievements, felt empty. At 52, he had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. His phone showed no personal messages, only business emails and calendar reminders. Across town, in a rundown shelter in the Bronx, Amani pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders. The social worker, Ms. Martinez, sat across from her with a stack of forms and a patient expression. "The program offers job training, housing assistance, and counseling," Ms. Martinez explained, sliding the papers forward. "You're 23, Amani. You have your whole life ahead of you." Amani's fingers traced the edge of the form but didn't pick it up. "I've heard these promises before." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Last program kicked me out when funding got cut. The one before that shut down completely. This one's different. It's privately funded, stable." Ms. Martinez's eyes were kind, but Amani had seen kind eyes turn cold before. "I'll think about it." She wouldn't. 6 years on the streets had taught her that the only person she could rely on was herself. Standing up, she grabbed her backpack, everything she owned packed inside. The rain had lessened to a drizzle when William left Thornton Industries that evening. His driver had called in sick, but William didn't mind walking. Sometimes the noise of the city helped quiet his thoughts. He turned onto Fifth Avenue, his Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles. That's when he saw her. A young woman in a threadbare jacket, holding a cardboard sign. Something about her made him stop. Maybe it was the way she held herself, proud despite her circumstances. Or perhaps it was her eyes, holding a familiar sadness he recognized from his own mirror. "Would you like to get some coffee?" The words left his mouth before he could think better of them. He gestured to the cafe across the street, its warm lights inviting in the growing dusk. Amani studied him suspiciously. She'd learned to read people quickly, a survival skill. This man in his expensive suit didn't fit the usual profile of those who stopped to help. No religious pamphlets, no condescending pity. Just a simple offer of coffee. Why? She kept her distance, one hand gripping her backpack strap. Because it's cold, and everyone deserves a warm drink on a day like this. He held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. Just coffee. In public. You can leave anytime. The cafe was nearly empty. William ordered 2 large coffees and, at Amani's hesitant nod, added sandwiches to the order. They sat by the window, steam rising from their cups, neither aware that this random encounter would change both their lives forever. The cafe's overhead lights cast harsh shadows across their table. Amani wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, savoring its warmth while keeping her eyes fixed on William. She hadn't touched the sandwich yet. "How long have you been on the streets?" William asked, trying to break the silence. "Long enough." Amani's response was clipped. She'd had these conversations before, well-meaning strangers who wanted to feel good about themselves by listening to her sob story. If you're looking for some inspirational tale to tell at your next charity gala, you won't find it here. William leaned back, surprised by her directness. No charity galas planned. Just curious. Right. Because rich guys in $1,000 suits regularly stop to buy coffee for homeless people out of pure curiosity. Her voice dripped with sarcasm, but she finally took a bite of the sandwich. The mention of his suit made William adjust his tie unconsciously. "I'm looking for someone, actually. My daughter." He hadn't planned to share this, but something about Amani's defensive posture reminded him of someone. "She'd be about your age now." Amani's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. Her heart began to race, but she kept her expression neutral. There are lots of missing girls in New York. What makes you think you'll find yours? I don't know if I will. William's voice softened. Her mother and I, things ended badly. Martha, that's her mother, she struggled with addiction. When she disappeared, she took our daughter with her. I searched, hired private investigators, but... He trailed off, staring into his coffee. The sandwich in Amani's stomach turned to lead. Martha. The name echoed in her head, bringing with it fragments of memory she'd fought hard to suppress. A woman's laugh, the smell of alcohol, strange men coming and going from a dingy apartment. What was your daughter's name? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Amara. William pulled out his wallet, removing a worn photograph. This is the last picture I have of her. She was 4. Amani didn't need to look at the photo. She knew what she'd see, a little girl with dark curly hair and a gap-toothed smile, sitting on a carousel horse. She remembered the day that picture was taken, one of the few clear memories from before everything fell apart. Your ex-wife changed it, Amani said quietly. The name. Said Amara sounded too fancy. She watched understanding slowly dawn on William's face. Called me Amani instead. Said it meant peace in Arabic, though I doubt she actually knew that. William's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. The color drained from his face as he really looked at her for the first time, seeing past the street-worn clothes and defensive posture to the features that mirrored his own mother's. All these years. His voice cracked. He reached across the table, but Amani jerked back. Don't. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You don't get to have some touching reunion moment. You gave up looking. I never gave up, William protested. The investigators couldn't find any trace after Seattle. Martha had started using different names, moving between cities. But you stopped actively searching, Amani cut him off. Decided to focus on building your empire instead. Well, congratulations. Looks like that worked out great for you. Memories flooded William's mind, countless nights staring at that photograph, the guilt eating away at him as years passed and new business opportunities demanded his attention. The gradual acceptance that he might never find her, the way he'd buried himself in work to numb the pain. You're right, he admitted. I should have done more. Should have searched harder, longer. He looked up at her, seeing the years of hardship etched in her young face. Amani, please. I need to go. She grabbed her backpack, leaving the half-eaten sandwich. At the door, she paused. Don't try to find me again. I've survived this long without a father. I don't need one now. William watched her disappear into the rainy evening, his heart heavy with the weight of lost time and opportunities. The photograph lay on the table between them, a ghost of what could have been. The next 3 days passed in a blur for William. He sat through meetings distracted, signed documents without reading them, and spent hours staring at his computer screen, searching homeless shelter databases. The image of Amani walking away haunted him. His assistant, Jenny, noticed the change. Sir, you've missed 2 board calls and rescheduled the Tokyo meeting 3 times. William barely heard her. He'd hired a new private investigator, one who specialized in finding people in homeless communities. The PI had tracked Amani to Hope Harbor Shelter in the Bronx. Cancel everything for the afternoon, he told Jenny, grabbing his coat. She started to protest about the shareholders' meeting, but he was already heading for the elevator. Hope Harbor Shelter was a stark contrast to his corporate office. The building was old but clean, with motivational posters covering water-stained walls. William felt out of place in his business suit as he approached the front desk. I'm looking for, he started. Group meetings down the hall, the receptionist interrupted, not looking up from her computer. Everyone's welcome. William started to correct her but stopped. Through the open door, he caught a glimpse of Amani sitting in a circle of chairs. She was wearing the same jacket as before, but her hair was damp from a recent shower. He slipped into the room quietly, taking a seat at the back. The group leader, a middle-aged woman with gray dreadlocks, was speaking about trauma and healing. Amani kept her eyes fixed on the floor, but her body tensed. She knew he was there. Would anyone like to share today? The group leader asked. Several people spoke about their struggles, job losses, addiction, family problems. William listened, really listened, hearing stories that never made it to his corporate boardroom. "How about you, sir?" The group leader turned to him. "New faces are always welcome to share." Amani's head snapped up, a mix of anger and curiosity in her expression. William cleared his throat. "My name is William," he started, surprised by how vulnerable his voice sounded in this room. "I lost my daughter when she was 4. Or rather, I failed her. Her mother was struggling with addiction, and instead of getting her the help she needed, I focused on work. Thought I could fix everything with money." The room was silent, listening. Amani's knuckles were white where she gripped her chair. "I hired people to find them when they disappeared. Told myself I was doing everything I could. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of failing as a father, afraid of not being enough. So I built a company instead. Easier to be a CEO than a dad." He noticed Amani's grip on her chair loosening slightly. "I recently found out my daughter has been living on the streets. She's strong, survivor. Made it without my help. But all I can think about is every cold night she faced alone, every meal she missed, every moment I should have been there for her." Tears rolled down his cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away. "I don't deserve her forgiveness. I just want a chance to try to make things right, not because I expect anything, but because she deserves better. She always did." After the meeting, people filed out slowly. Some patted William's shoulder as they passed. Amani remained in her chair, staring at the empty space where the circle had been. "You shouldn't be here," she said finally. "I know." William stayed in his seat. "But I needed you to hear the truth." "Truth?" She laughed bitterly. "You want to know my truth? I spent my 10th birthday in a car because Mom's boyfriend kicked us out. Learned to pick pockets at 12 because Mom spent our food money on drugs. Got my first fake ID at 14 so I could work at a diner. That's my truth." "I want to hear it all," William said quietly. "Every part. Even the parts that will make me hate myself more than I already do." Amani finally looked at him. "Why? So you can what? Sweep in with your millions and fix everything? Life doesn't work that way." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. I can't fix the past. But I'm here now, asking to listen. Just listen." The group leader approached them. "Amani, you've never shared in group before. Maybe having your father here is a sign it's time." "He's not my..." Amani stopped herself. The denial felt hollow after hearing William's story. "I'm not ready." "Nobody ever is," the leader said gently. "That's why we have each other." After attending several group sessions, William began noticing the shelter's needs. The roof leaked when it rained, the heating system was unreliable, and the kitchen equipment was outdated. He stayed after one session, speaking with the director, Maria Santos. "We operate on donations," Maria explained, showing him around. "Every dollar goes to basic necessities, food, hygiene supplies, basic maintenance. There's never enough for major repairs." William observed residents huddled in blankets near space heaters. "What's your annual operating budget?" $300,000, when we're lucky." Maria sighed. "We house 40 people on average, provide meals for twice that many." William did quick mental calculations. "What if we organized a fundraiser? Something substantial, corporate sponsors, media coverage, auction items. Rich people paying to gawk at homeless people." Amani's voice came from behind them. She'd been helping in the kitchen and overheard their conversation. "Turn us into some poverty tourism attraction." "No," William turned to face her. "A chance to show people the reality. Not statistics, but real stories. Real needs." He paused. "Only if people want to share. No pressure, no exploitation." Maria looked between them, sensing the tension. "We could certainly use the help, but Amani's right, our residents aren't exhibits." "What if they ran it?" William suggested. "The residents. Their stories, their way. I'll provide resources, connections, but they control the narrative." Amani crossed her arms. "And I suppose you'll want me to speak." Tell everyone how the poor little rich girl ended up on the streets. Only if you want to. William kept his voice steady. This isn't about us, Amani. It's about everyone here. People who deserve better than broken heaters and leaky roofs. Over the next few weeks, William threw himself into the project. He contacted corporate partners, secured venue donations, and worked with shelter residents to plan the event. Some wanted to display artwork they'd created, others offered to cater using skills from previous careers. Each person contributed in their own way. The local news picked up the story. Millionaire CEO partners with homeless shelter. William insisted on keeping the focus on Hope Harbor and its residents, refusing personal interviews. But rumors circulated about his involvement, especially when people noticed him spending more time at the shelter than his office. One evening, as volunteers were planning the event program, Maria approached Amani. We need a keynote speaker. Someone who can bridge both worlds. Amani, who had been helping with event logistics while carefully avoiding direct interaction with William, shook her head. No. I'm not your poster child. You're not a poster child, Maria countered. You're a voice for those who haven't found theirs yet. Think about Jamal, Sarah, old Mr. Peterson. How many others have stories they're afraid to tell? Across the room, William was helping a resident named Tony practice his speech about veterans' homelessness. He didn't look like a CEO anymore, his sleeves were rolled up, his tie long discarded. He listened intently as Tony spoke, offering encouragement without trying to change the man's words. He'll use it for publicity, Amani argued weakly. Turn it into some redemption story. Maybe, Maria agreed. Or maybe he's finally learning what really matters. Either way, does it change what you have to say? The fundraiser was scheduled for the following month at the Metropolitan Hotel's Grand Ballroom, donated after William made a few calls. As the date approached, corporate sponsorships poured in, along with media requests and ticket sales. We've already raised $500,000 in sponsorships, William reported during a planning meeting. But it's not just about money. Every sponsor has agreed to implement hiring programs for shelter residents. Job training, housing assistance, healthcare. The residents applauded, but Amani noticed William wasn't celebrating. Instead, he watched her with cautious hope. She'd been avoiding his attempts at conversation, focusing instead on helping other residents prepare their presentations. After the meeting, William approached her. The speaking slot is still open. No pressure, but... Why are you really doing this? Amani interrupted. Guilt. Public relations. Try to buy back 20 years of absence. Because it matters, he answered simply. Because every person here matters. Including you. Especially you. He handed her a folder. Your story is yours to tell or keep. But if you decide to share it, this might help. Inside the folder was the photograph from his wallet, her 4-year-old self on the carousel, along with newspaper clippings about Martha's disappearance, private investigator reports, and a handwritten letter he'd never sent. The shelter's common room had become a hub of activity as residents prepared for the fundraiser. Among them was Jamal, a 25-year-old former college student who'd ended up homeless after his scholarship fell through. He noticed Amani sitting alone, staring at the folder William had given her. That's some heavy reading, he said, dropping into the chair beside her. Amani quickly closed the folder. Just old papers. Sure. Jamal had a way of seeing through people's defenses. He'd been at Hope Harbor for 8 months, working part-time as a computer repair technician while trying to save for college. Same old papers you've been staring at for the past hour. You've been watching me. Amani raised an eyebrow. Observing. Different thing. He grinned. Like I observed that rich dude isn't actually here for the PR, man's actually listening to people. Learning names, stories. Yesterday he spent 3 hours helping Miss Jenkins with her resume. Amani had noticed too, though she tried not to. William had become a fixture at the shelter, showing up in increasingly casual clothes, rolling up his sleeves to help with whatever needed doing. The residents had stopped seeing him as the billionaire CEO and started seeing him as just William. Doesn't change the past, Amani muttered. Nope, Jamal agreed. But maybe that's not the point. He pulled out his laptop, a refurbished model he'd fixed himself. Want to see something? He opened a document filled with writing. My story. Going to share it at the fundraiser. Figure if I'm asking people for a chance, they should know who they're giving it to. Amani read portions of his work, the story of a brilliant student derailed by financial hardship, his struggle with depression, the shame of asking for help. It was raw, honest, powerful. This is good, she said. Really good. Yeah. Jamal closed the laptop. Scared as hell to share it though. Easier to let people think you're just another statistic. Once they know your story, it becomes real. You become real to them. His words hit home. Amani thought about the folder, about William's letter she hadn't yet read. About becoming real to someone who'd spent years searching for a ghost. Meanwhile, William was in the shelter's kitchen, learning from residents about their daily challenges. He ditched his suit for jeans and a sweater, helping serve meals and listening to stories. Never thought I'd see a CEO washing dishes, remarked Carlos, a former chef who'd lost everything to gambling addiction. Former CEO, William corrected. He delegated most of his responsibilities to his board, much to their concern. This matters more than running $1 billion company. William scrubbed a particularly stubborn pot. Money's just numbers. Here, we're dealing with real life. Real people. He glanced toward the common room where Amani and Jamal were talking. Real connections. Over the next few days, Amani watched as William became more integrated into shelter life. He started a morning coffee group where residents could discuss job searches and share leads. He brought in professionals to offer free services, medical checkups, legal advice, counseling. Everything was done quietly, without fanfare or publicity. Your father's different than I expected, Jamal commented one evening as they watched William help an elderly resident practice computer skills. He's not Amani started automatically, then stopped. He's trying too hard. Maybe, Jamal shrugged. Or maybe he's finally trying hard enough. He nudged her shoulder. You going to read that letter? The folder sat in Amani's backpack, still unopened. Haven't decided. World's full of people who wish they had someone trying that hard to make things right, Jamal said quietly. Just saying. That night, after most residents had gone to bed, Amani found William still in the computer room, organizing donated laptops for job searches. Need help? She asked, surprising both of them. William looked up, careful to keep his expression neutral. These need to be cataloged and checked for basic functionality. They worked in silence for a while, the quiet punctuated only by keyboard clicks and mouse movements. I haven't read it yet, Amani said finally. The letter. You don't have to. William kept his eyes on the screen. It's yours to read or not. Like everything else, your choice. The shelter's rooftop garden became their neutral ground. One evening, a week before the fundraiser, Amani found William there, tending to the tomato plants residents had started growing. I read it, she said, holding up the worn envelope. Your letter. William's hand stilled on the plant. He didn't turn around. That was written on your 10th birthday. I used to write one every year, hoping somehow they'd reach you. You wrote about my first steps. Amani's voice was controlled, measured. The time I painted the cat blue. The carousel day. She moved closer, standing beside him at the garden bed. Why did you keep writing after you stopped searching? I never stopped searching, William corrected gently. I stopped believing I'd succeed. Different thing. He finally looked at her. The letters helped me remember. Kept you real when everyone told me to move on. Amani pulled out another paper from her pocket, a newspaper clipping about Martha's disappearance. The article says you offered $1 million reward. $2 million by the third year. Private investigators in 12 states. Missing person networks. William's voice cracked. Your mother was good at disappearing. Changed names, moved constantly. Trail went cold in Seattle. She died there, Amani said quietly. Overdose. I was 13. She sat on one of the garden benches, and after a moment, William joined her, leaving space between them. Foster care found me, but I ran. Kept running until I ended up here. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate. If I'd found you sooner. I used to imagine you'd show up, Amani admitted. Every birthday, every Christmas. Had this whole fantasy about you swooping in, saving us both. Mom would get clean, we'd be a family. She laughed bitterly. Reality wasn't that kind. Tell me, William said. Everything. The good, the bad. I need to know. So she did. As the sun set over New York, Amani shared her story. The constant moving, never staying in one school long enough to make friends. Learning to forge her mother's signature on school forms. The string of Martha's boyfriends, some kind, most not. The hunger, the fear, the nights spent in cars or shelters. William listened, his heart breaking with each revelation. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to explain or defend. Just listened. After Mom died, I thought about looking for you, Amani continued. Found some articles about your company online. You seemed happy. Successful. Had a new family. What? William turned to her. No, I never. There hasn't been anyone else. No other family. The photos. Holiday parties, charity events. Woman with blonde hair, 2 kids. My sister Rebecca and her children, William explained. They're the only family I have. Had. He looked at her. Have. The correction hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. I need to tell you something else, Amani said finally. About Mom. About why we really left. William tensed. Whatever it is. She was scared. Amani's voice was barely a whisper. Not of you. Of herself. She said she was afraid she'd hurt me. That the drugs were making her do things she thought leaving was protecting me. The revelation hit William like a physical blow. All these years, he'd assumed Martha left out of spite or addiction. The truth was more complicated, more tragic. We should talk to her, he said finally. Your Aunt Rebecca. She tried to help your mother back then. Might have information we both need. Amani stood abruptly. I'm not ready for more family. Just information, William assured her. No pressure, no expectations. But if we're going to heal this, we need to understand all of it. The whole truth. Amani looked out over the city lights. The folder in her hands contained 20 years of loss, love, and missed connections. Will she be at the fundraiser? Only if you want her to be. I'll think about it. Amani turned back to him. And William. Those letters, thank you for not forgetting me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But as they stood together in the rooftop garden, surrounded by growing things, it felt like the beginning of something new. The meeting was arranged at a private room in a small diner in Greenwich Village, neutral territory. Rebecca arrived first, her blonde hair now streaked with gray, carrying a box of old photographs and documents. William and Amani arrived together but entered separately, the new fragility of their relationship evident in their careful movements. You look just like her, Rebecca said when Amani walked in. She stopped herself from moving forward for a hug, recognizing the guardedness in her niece's posture. Same eyes. Same strength. You mean same stubbornness? William attempted to lighten the mood, but his voice was tense. They sat at a booth, the box between them like a barrier. A waitress brought coffee none of them would drink. I need to know everything, Amani stated flatly. No sugarcoating, no protecting anyone's feelings. The whole truth. Rebecca nodded, pulling out a worn journal. Martha gave me this the week before she disappeared. Made me promise not to show William unless. She paused. Unless something happened to her. And something did, Amani's voice was sharp. 10 years ago. Why didn't you find me then? We tried, William interjected. The Seattle police. Not you, Amani cut him off, eyes fixed on Rebecca. You knew more. The journal proves it. Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened the journal. Martha was sick, Amani. Not just the addiction. She had episodes, periods where she'd lose touch with reality. The doctors called it drug-induced psychosis, but it started before the drugs. William's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. What? She hid it well, Rebecca continued. used the drugs to self-medicate. But she was terrified of hurting Amani. There were moments, blackouts, where she couldn't remember what she'd done. Amani's face had gone pale. The burns on my arm. When I was 4. She said it was an accident. It was, Rebecca said quickly. But it scared her enough to run. She thought. She glanced at William. She thought if she told you the truth, you'd take Amani away. Your lawyers, your money, she knew she'd lose everything. I would have helped her, William's voice cracked. We could have gotten her treatment, support. You were already pulling away, Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. Working longer hours, avoiding the problems at home. Martha saw it. She convinced herself you'd stop loving her, that you were building evidence to take custody. Amani stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, New York traffic flowed endlessly, oblivious to the pain being excavated in this small room. She did hurt me, she said finally, her back to them. Not physically. But watching her destroy herself, bringing strange men home, leaving me alone for days, that hurt worse than any burn. William moved to stand, but Rebecca stopped him with a look. This was Amani's moment. There's more, Rebecca said quietly, pulling out a series of letters. She wrote these from various cities. I tried to track her, but she never stayed in one place long enough. The last one. She pulled out a final envelope, unopened. It came 2 weeks after her death. Return address was a shelter in Seattle. Amani turned back, staring at the envelope. Read it. Rebecca's hands shook as she opened the letter, yellowed with age. Dear Becca, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. The doctors say my mind is going faster than my body. The drugs don't help anymore, just make the voices louder. But I need you to know, everything I did, running away, keeping Amani from her father, it was wrong. I see that now. Tell William I'm sorry. Tell him I didn't run because he failed us. I ran because I failed them. Amani deserves better than a mother who can't trust her own mind. She deserves her father's love, his stability, everything I couldn't give her. She's so strong, Becca. So beautiful. Like a flower growing through concrete. If you find her, tell her I loved her enough to let her go. Even if I did it all wrong. And tell her about the trust fund. The one William set up when she was born. I never touched it. It's still there, waiting. Not because she needs the money, but because she needs to know her father never stopped believing she'd come home. Martha. The room was silent except for muffled sobs. It took Amani a moment to realize they were coming from her. William had moved without her noticing, standing close but not touching, offering silent support. 20 years, Amani whispered. 20 years of blame and anger, and it was all. She couldn't finish. Complicated, Rebecca supplied. It was all complicated. Love usually is. The night of the fundraiser arrived with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The Metropolitan Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed. Instead of the usual corporate elegance, the walls displayed artwork and photographs created by shelter residents, telling their stories in vivid colors and stark images. Amani stood backstage, gripping her note cards. She'd rewritten her speech dozens of times, torn between raw honesty and self-preservation. Jamal had already given his presentation, moving the audience to tears with his story of academic dreams derailed by circumstance. You don't have to do this, William said softly, approaching but maintaining the careful distance they'd established. He'd traded his usual business suit for a more understated charcoal blazer, trying to blend in rather than stand out. Yes, I do. Amani smoothed her borrowed dress, a simple black sheath that Maria had helped her choose. Not for you. Not even for me. For them. She gestured toward the audience where shelter residents sat alongside millionaires and corporate executives. The event had already raised over $3 million. Each resident's story had opened more wallets, touched more hearts. But Amani's speech was different. She wasn't just another success story waiting to happen. She was William Thornton's long-lost daughter, though only a handful of people knew that fact. Ladies and gentlemen, Maria's voice came from the podium. Our next speaker has been with Hope Harbor for 2 years. Her journey represents both the failures of our system and the possibility of redemption. Please welcome, Amani. The spotlight felt hot, unfamiliar. Amani walked to the podium, her step steady despite her racing heart. She looked out at the sea of faces, the wealthy donors in their fine clothes, her fellow residents in their borrowed best, and William, standing at the back of the room, his face a mask of contained emotion. "My story begins with a carousel," she started, abandoning her note cards. A little girl with braided hair, sitting on a painted horse, her father taking pictures. It's one of my few happy memories from childhood. The rest. She took a deep breath. The rest is a lesson in how quickly a life can unravel. She told them everything. The years of moving from city to city, the hunger, the fear. Learning to be invisible in school so teachers wouldn't ask questions. Watching her mother's slow descent into madness and addiction. The cold nights, the empty promises, the desperate choices. Society likes simple narratives, she continued. The homeless are lazy. Addicts choose their fate. Children of privilege who end up on the streets must have done something to deserve it. But life isn't simple. Mental illness doesn't care about your bank balance. Addiction doesn't check your pedigree. And children just try to survive. In the audience, Rebecca wiped tears from her eyes. Several corporate executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps seeing their own children in Amani's story. For years, I blamed my father for not finding me. Blamed my mother for running. Blamed myself for not being enough to make her stay, to make her well. Amani's voice cracked slightly. But blame doesn't keep you warm at night. Anger doesn't fill an empty stomach. At some point, you have to choose, let the past destroy you or use it to build something new. She looked directly at William now. I recently learned that my father never stopped looking for me. That my mother ran not from lack of love, but from fear of hurting me. That sometimes the worst choices come from the best intentions. It doesn't erase the pain or the years lost, but it offers something else, the possibility of understanding. Of forgiveness. Of change. The room was completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving, transfixed by her words. Hope Harbor isn't just a shelter. It's a place where people like me learn to stop running. Where we find not just beds and meals, but dignity. Community. A chance to rewrite our stories. She gestured to the artwork around the room. Every person here has a story like mine. Different details, same core truth, we all deserve a chance to come home. Whether that's to a place, a purpose, or, she paused, meeting William's tear-filled eyes, a person. As applause thundered through the ballroom, Amani stepped away from the podium. She felt lighter, as if speaking her truth had lifted a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. William made his way toward the stage, but Amani slipped out a side door. She needed air, space to process the magnitude of what she'd just done. In the quiet hallway, she heard the muffled sounds of checkbooks being opened, pledges being made, lives potentially being changed. She'd done it. She'd told her story. But now that the truth was out there, hanging in the air like invisible smoke, what came next? A week after the fundraiser, William invited Amani to his office at Thornton Industries. The corporate environment felt sterile after the warmth of Hope Harbor, but he wanted her to see this part of his life too. She arrived wearing clothes bought with her own money. She'd found a job at a local bookstore, refusing William's offers of financial help. Nice view, she commented, looking out over Manhattan. Different from the shelter's rooftop garden. William sat not behind his imposing desk, but in one of the visitor chairs, trying to minimize the power dynamics. I've been thinking about what you said in your speech. About coming home. If this is another offer to move into your penthouse. No, he interrupted gently. This is about giving others a home. He handed her a folder, not worn and old like the one containing her childhood memories, but crisp and new. I'm converting half my personal fortune into a foundation. For homeless youth and families affected by mental illness. Amani opened the folder, scanning the documents. The numbers made her dizzy, hundreds of millions of dollars. Why? Because you were right. About everything. William leaned forward. Money didn't find you. All my resources, my connections, and in the end, it was pure chance that brought us together. But money can help others. Prevent more stories like ours. And you want my help? Amani's voice was skeptical. I want you to run it. He held up a hand as she started to protest. Not because you're my daughter. Because you understand both worlds. You know what people really need, what works and what doesn't. You have the perspective I lack. Amani stood, pacing the office. I don't have any experience running a foundation. No degree, no. You have life experience. Street smarts. Compassion. William watched her move. Everything else can be learned. I'll teach you the business side, but you'll teach me what really matters. Before she could respond, William's assistant burst in. Sir, emergency board meeting. Johnson and Associates is attempting a hostile takeover. William's face hardened. How? They've been quietly buying shares through shell companies. They've called for a vote of no confidence, citing your recent distractions. Amani watched the corporate drama unfold with a strange detachment. This was the world that had kept William searching for her with private investigators instead of hitting the streets himself. The world that had shaped him into someone who thought problems could be solved with money. Marcus Johnson, William muttered. Should have known he'd try something like this. Who's Marcus Johnson? Amani asked. William's jaw tightened. Old friend turned rival. He was close to your mother at one point. Before everything fell apart. The implications hung in the air. Another piece of the complicated puzzle that was their past. Sir, the assistant pressed. The board is waiting. Go, Amani said. Handle your crisis. The foundation can wait. But William shook his head. No. That's exactly what I did wrong before. Prioritizing business over what matters. He turned to his assistant. Tell the board I'll be there in an hour. And get me everything we have on Johnson's recent activities. After the assistant left, William turned back to Amani. I'm not asking for an answer about the foundation right now. But I want you to know, whatever happens with the company, the money for the foundation is secure. I've made sure of that. You might lose everything, Amani pointed out. Your company, your position. I lost everything once before, William said quietly. When you disappeared. Took me 20 years to realize what everything really means. He stood, straightening his tie. I have to face the board. But think about the foundation. Not for me. For all the other Amanis out there, running scared, thinking no one's looking for them. As William headed for the door, Amani called out, "What was Mom to Marcus Johnson?" William paused, hand on the doorknob. Someone he claimed to love. Someone he supplied with drugs. Someone he used to try to destroy me. He looked back at her. Maybe it's time you knew that part of the story too. The truth about Marcus Johnson unfolded like a noir film. Through Rebecca's old letters and William's corporate records, Amani learned how Johnson had used Martha's addiction to gain insider information about Thornton Industries. He'd been the one who encouraged her paranoid thoughts about William, supplied her with drugs, and ultimately helped her disappear, not out of concern, but as part of a long game to take control of the company. He's been waiting for this moment, William explained during a late-night strategy session in his office. Using my involvement with Hope Harbor to paint me as unstable, distracted. The board's nervous. Amani sat across from him, surrounded by documents and old photographs. One showed Martha with Johnson at a corporate event, his hand possessively on her shoulder. He helped her run. Yes, William's voice was heavy. But I don't think he expected her to run from him too. When she disappeared in Seattle, he lost his leverage over both of us. The corporate takeover attempt had made headlines. Thornton Industries in crisis, CEO's homeless shelter project threatens company stability. The articles painted William as a man having a midlife crisis, endangering shareholder value with his charitable obsessions. But Johnson had miscalculated. He didn't expect Amani to fight back. I want to tell my story, she announced. The whole story. Not just at Hope Harbor, but everything. About Johnson, about Mom, about how he used her addiction to try to destroy you. Amani, no, William protested. Exposing yourself to that kind of public scrutiny is my choice, she cut him off. You spent 20 years looking for me. Let me spend 20 minutes saving what you built. The press conference was hastily arranged. Reporters packed the Thornton Industries lobby, expecting another corporate drama. Instead, they got Amani, standing tall in a borrowed suit, telling a story that transformed the narrative overnight. Marcus Johnson didn't just try to steal a company, she began, cameras flashing. He stole a mother's sanity, a daughter's childhood, a father's hope. Her voice carried through the room, strong and clear. I know, because I was that daughter. She laid it all bare, Johnson's manipulation of Martha's mental illness, his role in their disappearance, his decades-long plot to seize control of Thornton Industries. But more than that, she told a story of redemption. My father didn't abandon his company for a homeless shelter project, she continued. He finally found what he spent 20 years looking for. Me. His daughter. And in finding me, he found a greater purpose for his wealth than just making more money. The room erupted with questions, but Amani wasn't finished. The foundation we're establishing isn't a distraction from Thornton Industries' mission, it's an evolution of it. While Marcus Johnson spent decades plotting corporate takeovers, my father built something lasting. Now he's choosing to use that success to prevent other families from experiencing what ours did. William watched from the side, his heart swelling with pride and love. Johnson's takeover bid crumbled as shareholders rallied behind the new narrative. The board, moved by Amani's testimony and the positive public response, renewed their confidence in William's leadership. But the real victory came later, in the quiet of Hope Harbor's rooftop garden. You didn't have to do that, William said, helping Amani tend to the tomato plants they'd grown together. Expose yourself to the world. Yes, I did, she replied. Because it's time to stop running. From the past, from who we are, from each other. She handed him a water bottle, their fingers brushing briefly. Besides, someone once told me that sometimes the worst choices come from the best intentions. Maybe it's time we both made some better choices. William looked at his daughter, strong, resilient, incredible, and saw not what he'd lost, but what he'd found. The foundation's first project, he said. I want it to be a mental health center. Named after your mother. Amani's eyes welled with tears. She'd like that. A chance to help others, even after she's gone. We'll help them together, William said softly. If you're ready. Amani looked out over the city, her city, with all its darkness and light, its lost souls and found families. I'm ready, she said. To come home. And there, among the growing things, father and daughter began writing a new chapter, not forgetting the past, but using it to build a better future. Not just for themselves, but for all the lost children and broken families still waiting to find their way home.